in Burlington Township, New Jersey. And what should have been just another night for a young woman became the final, tragic chapter of her life. 28-year-old Tiana Drummond, a devoted mother of two and a graduate with dreams far bigger than her small town, was found brutally beaten inside her own apartment. The man she once trusted with her heart, her fiancé, was discovered dead nearby from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. How does a home filled with children's laughter and holiday memories become a place of unimaginable violence? And what went so horribly wrong behind those walls that no one saw coming? Let's go back to where it all began. Tiana Drummond was born into a close-knit family in New Jersey, the kind of family where birthdays were never missed, where holidays were loud and warm, and where love was given freely. She was the second of three sisters and always known as the dreamer of the group. From a young age, Tiana had a spark in her, one that made people stop and take notice. Not because she was loud or demanding, but because she had a way of making everyone around her feel seen. She was creative, determined, soft-spoken but sharp. As a teenager, she was obsessed with music and entertainment, spending late nights in her room, sketching out ideas for fashion shows, music videos, even event plans. Her walls were covered in quotes about success, ambition, and strength, quiet affirmations that she carried with her long after high school. And even then, even in the heart of her youth, she was always looking out for others. Friends remember her as the one who checked in when you were quiet, the one who offered her last dollar without hesitation. She had this calm, nurturing energy that made you feel safe. That nurturing spirit only grew stronger when she became a mother. Tiana gave birth to her first son at a young age, and while some would have folded under the pressure, she embraced motherhood like she'd been preparing for it her entire life. She didn't complain. She didn't give up on her dreams. Instead, she pressed forward, juggling night shifts, online courses, and diapers with a kind of grace that most couldn't understand. A few years later, her second son was born. Now a mother of two, Tiana's days were full. School drop-offs, football practices, bedtime stories, but she didn't see it as a burden. She called her boys her purpose, and everything she did was to build a better future for them. She often said, "I want them to see what it looks like when you never give up." And she didn't. Tiana went on to graduate from Full Sail University with a degree in entertainment business. It was a proud moment, not just for her, but for everyone who had watched her struggle and rise. She had dreams of launching her own business, something in event planning or music marketing. She wanted to create spaces for other creatives, particularly Black women, to thrive. She wasn't just chasing success, she was trying to build something meaningful. But even as she pursued her ambitions, she never missed the little things. She was that mom who packed lunches with notes tucked inside. She volunteered at school events, brought orange slices to games, and stood on the sidelines in the cold cheering like her boys were in the Super Bowl. To her kids, she was a superhero. To her friends, she was the glue that held everyone together. To her family, she was a light, calm, wise beyond her years, and deeply loyal. The people around her couldn't help but admire how she did it all. How she stayed kind in a world that was often unkind. How she protected her children's joy like it was sacred. And yet, for all the love she gave, for all the strength she carried on her back, Tiana rarely leaned on others. She had this quiet resilience, this belief that she had to keep it all together, even when life felt overwhelming. Those who knew her best sometimes worried about that. They noticed that she was always the listener but rarely the one to share her own pain. She laughed often, but her eyes sometimes told a different story. There were moments, fleeting ones, where a heaviness crept in, but Tiana would shake it off, flash that signature smile, and move on. Because that's who she was, a fighter, a provider, a dreamer who refused to be broken. In 2016, she met Kristopher Corry. At first, it seemed like a perfect match. He was charming, known in the community as a youth football coach who connected with kids, including Tiana's oldest son. He seemed invested in family, in building something lasting. They quickly grew close, their relationship moving from friendship to romance, and eventually, engagement. He was present, supportive. He understood the demands of raising boys and even shared in it. For Tiana, who had spent so long doing it all alone, this felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one where she didn't have to carry everything by herself. Together, they moved into the Willow Point apartments. It was modest but comfortable, filled with family photos, art projects from the kids, and the kind of warmth that only comes from a mother's touch. Friends would often see them out at football games, Kristopher coaching on the field, Tiana cheering from the bleachers with the other moms. To outsiders, it looked like a young family finding their rhythm, blending love, structure, and a shared vision for the future. And for a while, it was good. Tiana spoke about opening her own business again. She was looking into certifications, making calls, writing in journals. Her boys were growing fast, and she had plans, big ones. But sometimes late at night, Tiana would text her sisters or close friends with messages that didn't quite add up. Vague comments about stress, unexplained tension, little things that on their own didn't raise alarms. But looking back now, they were signs. Signs that something was shifting, something was cracking, something dark was forming beneath the surface of a picture-perfect life. And slowly, that quiet heaviness Tiana used to brush off began to grow heavier. Her relationship with Kristopher, once full of promise and partnership, was changing. But to most people, the details remained just out of view. That's where the cracks begin. At first, the changes were subtle. So subtle, they could almost be ignored. A missed phone call here, a short, tense text there, a smile that didn't quite reach Tiana's eyes. She still showed up, still posted pictures with the boys, still clapped loudly on the sidelines of football games. But those closest to her began to notice something beneath the surface. Her laugh, once free and effortless, started sounding forced. She stopped talking about her business plans. She didn't gush about Kristopher the way she used to. And when her friends asked how things were at home, she gave vague answers, always trying to steer the conversation somewhere else. It wasn't like Tiana to hold back. She'd always been open about her struggles, always willing to let people into the harder parts of her journey. But something about this, something about what was happening between her and Kristopher, made her go quiet. And in hindsight, that silence was louder than anything she could have said. Kristopher, once seen as a pillar of discipline and leadership in the community, had started to change too. People noticed his temper flaring more often, sometimes over nothing at all. He'd grown withdrawn, edgy. Some of the parents from the youth football team he coached whispered about his sudden outbursts on the field. He'd lash out at referees, bark orders at kids, storm off when things didn't go his way. It wasn't just passion, it was anger, barely restrained. He carried pain from his past, pain that he never quite dealt with. Years ago, his older brother had been murdered in a street robbery, a loss that left a wound Kristopher never fully healed from. Those who knew him back then said the grief hardened him, made him colder, more guarded. But Tiana had seen the good in him, the soft spots, the part of him that still loved fiercely despite the scars. That's the version of him she fell in love with. But over time, that version started to disappear. By the winter of 2024, their home had grown tense. Not constantly, but enough to make people notice. Enough for Tiana's sister to grow worried after a call where Tiana sounded distracted, anxious. Enough for her best friend to start saving voice notes just in case. Because when Tiana did open up, she didn't say much, but what she did say stuck. That things weren't like before. That sometimes she felt like she couldn't breathe. That love, when laced with fear, doesn't feel like love anymore. There were no restraining orders, no criminal records of domestic violence, nothing that would make an outsider sound the alarm. But the signs were there if you looked closely enough. Friends started remembering the little details, like the time Tiana canceled plans last minute because she wasn't feeling up to it, but her voice had sounded like she'd been crying. Or the time she wore a long-sleeved shirt on a hot day and brushed off the reason why. These were the things that lingered in hindsight, the things people would torture themselves with later, wondering if they could have done more. The walls of their apartment began to hold more than memories. They absorbed arguments, some quiet and seething, others loud enough for neighbors to hear. The kind of arguments that left the air heavy long after the shouting stopped. One neighbor, who lived just across the hall, later admitted she'd begun keeping her TV on louder at night. Not because she liked noise, but because she couldn't bear the sound of the tension through the walls. Then came the final days. The holiday season had come and gone, but there was no joy in their apartment, not like before. Tiana had been quieter than usual on social media. No New Year's posts, no family photos, just silence. She told one friend over text that she was mentally drained and that she was trying to keep things together for the boys. Another message, sent days before everything fell apart, read simply, "Pray for me." On January 2nd, the sounds coming from their apartment were different. Not just another argument, not the usual tension. This time it was something more. A neighbor, used to the occasional raised voice or slammed door, felt something in her gut that told her this was not normal. The shouting was louder, more desperate. There was screaming, long drawn-out screaming that made her heart race. Then, silence. Complete unnatural silence. For a few moments, the hallway felt frozen in time. The neighbor stood by her door, listening, hoping to hear a voice, movement, anything. But none came. Just that dreadful, empty stillness that made the hairs on her neck stand up. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Her voice shook as she told the dispatcher what she'd heard. She didn't know exactly what was happening inside that apartment, but she knew one thing for certain: something was very, very wrong. No one on the outside could have imagined what had unfolded behind that closed door. Tiana had always kept her world spinning, no matter how heavy the burden. She had protected her children, her home, her peace, even when her own heart was breaking. But in those final moments, she faced something no one should ever have to. Something violent, final, unspeakable. And yet, no one knew it yet. Not fully. Not until the police would arrive and cross the threshold into that apartment. Not until the horror was no longer just a feeling, but a reality too awful to comprehend. Because on January 2nd, behind closed doors, the cracks finally gave way. And the life Tiana had fought so hard to build, shattered. The silence outside that apartment door was shattered the moment the police stepped inside. What they found would haunt the halls of Willow Point Apartments long after that night. Tiana Drummond's lifeless body, bruised and broken, bearing the raw marks of a desperate, violent struggle. The air hung heavy with something too grim, too tragic to fully grasp in that first instant. Nearby, Kristopher Corry had taken his own life. The gunshot wound was a silent but terrible punctuation to the horror that had unfolded. Two lives, once intertwined by love and hope, now extinguished forever in the darkness of that small apartment. Two boys, aged 5 and 10, suddenly left without the arms that had held them so tightly. The investigators moved carefully, piecing together the last hours that had spiraled out of control. They found shattered objects, signs of a confrontation too fierce to be contained by words. There were no easy answers, no clear explanations that could untangle the chaos that led to the violent end. The story that emerged was one of love turned toxic, passion twisted by pain, and secrets buried beneath years of smiles and good intentions. But the deeper reasons, the why, the how, the moments that pushed two people to a final breaking point, remained locked in silence. Kristopher's struggles, Tiana's fears, the invisible battles fought behind closed doors, all mingled into a tragic enigma. News of the tragedy spread quickly through Burlington Township. The shock rippled through the tight-knit community like a cold wave. Friends who had cheered for Tiana at football games, neighbors who had shared small talk in the hallways, even strangers who had admired the family from afar, all were forced to confront the brutal reality. How could a woman so full of life, so fiercely devoted to her children, be taken so violently? How did the warmth that once radiated from her home turn into this? In the days that followed, the community's grief took shape through action. Fundraisers were organized for Tiana's boys, who now faced a future without either parent. Neighbors formed support networks, rallying around the children with hugs, meals, and promises to keep them safe. Memories of Tiana poured out. Her infectious laughter, her relentless love, the dreams she held tightly for her sons. She became more than a victim. She became a symbol of a love that had fought against the darkness until it was too late. Yet, beneath this collective mourning, uncomfortable questions lingered like shadows no one dared fully face. Were there signs that everyone missed? Moments that, if noticed, might have changed the outcome? The subtle cries for help that had gone unanswered? The invisible pain that masked itself behind smiles and silence? In the quiet corners of the town, whispers grew into conversations. Discussions about domestic violence, mental health, and the hidden struggles so many endure in silence. Tiana's story became a painful reminder that tragedy often hides behind closed doors, invisible until it's too late. Counselors and advocates spoke out, urging people to look closer, to listen more carefully, to understand that love can sometimes be a battlefield, and that the cost of ignoring the warning signs can be devastating. For Tiana's boys, the road ahead is uncertain. They have lost the two most important people in their lives in the most brutal way imaginable. But the community's embrace offers a fragile thread of hope, that even in the wake of unspeakable loss, love can endure, that the memory of their mother's fierce spirit and her fight to protect them can inspire strength. Tiana's life, though cut tragically short, reminds us all of the preciousness of every moment and the unseen struggles that many carry. It calls on us to be vigilant, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. Because behind every quiet home, every smile, there may be a story untold, a battle fought in silence, and a cry for help that we cannot afford to ignore. The night Tiana Drummond's world shattered is a stark testament to the fragile line between love and loss, and the urgent need to break that silence before it's too late.